the mic button.
Yeah,
Turn that
that's
on mute.
that's a weird thing that I never did like. They claimed that, they have some sessions that have 1,000 people in them, and if they don't do that, they have no way of getting them started because everybody starts talking at once. So
Right.
that's why they do that.
Yeah.
Makes it a
For sure.
little difficult when it's just a two-person meeting like we have,
Uh-huh.
but that's okay.
For sure.
All right, so we're going to start with number 3, I gather.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
That was the one that I was kind of stuck on. Like I was kind of confused on
Yeah.
how to set that one
Part
up.
Part A. Did you write that or did the teacher?
I wrote that. I'm not sure if it's correct or
Okay.
not.
I've always had a little bit of trouble with the concept of independent variable and dependent variable.
Me too. Like I looked up like the definition of both of them is the independent variable doesn't have to depend on something else.
Well, see, that's what I don't like, is I don't like that definition. In other
Yeah.
words, if I give you an equation, y equals 5x, we're going to say
Mhm.
x is the independent variable because it's what we can change, and then y is the dependent variable.
Right.
Okay? But
Okay.
what if I just take this equation and I make it y over 5 equals x? Now I could almost make an argument that y is the independent variable and x is the dependent variable.
Right.
I really don't like the words. I don't know why they teach it, and I don't see that much anymore. I rarely
It's ki-
see a student using the words independent and dependent variables.
I just think of them as X and Y.
Oh, well, I do too, and that's the
Yeah.
way you should think of them.
Okay.
Okay, I think.
Okay.
Now, let's go back and instead of define your variables, let's define it as x and y instead of independent and dependent.
Okay.
So what should x be?
I said X is the number of hats and T-shirts, and
Not
then
just
Y
the
would be
number of hats,
okay.
and y is the number of t-shirts.
So cost wouldn't go into there.
What's that?
So the cost wouldn't go into the.
No, notice that they give us the cost.
Oh, that's right.
Whenever they
Yeah.
give you something, that's not going to be a variable. It's not going to be part of the variable.
Okay.
Okay. Now, if I want to raise $3,000, how much do I get per hat?
Per hat you get $10.
So 10 times the number of hats I sell will give me the amount that I will raise from selling hats, correct?
Yeah.
Plus what?
So it'd be 10x plus 15y.
And what does that have to be?
And that's gonna have to equal to uh, 3,000.
Right. In other words, everything in my equation comes from all the numbers they give me.
Okay.
But one of the keys is don't ever make your variables be something that they are giving you in the problem. In other words,
Right.
I'm never going to let X be the cost of a hat.
No.
I know what that is. They tell me what that is.
Mhm.
But I'm going to let it be the number of hats that we sell.
Okay.
So that's one equation right there.
Okay.
Notice I
Cool.
cannot solve that for X or Y because I only have
No.
one equation.
Right.
So that's my equation that goes for A.
Would you have to like put that into y equals mx plus b format? Or you can't, can you?
You can, sure, you can.
Okay.
I'll subtract 10x from both sides.
Okay. Plus 3,000, then divide by
5 by
15.
15. So x equals minus 2/3 x plus 20. In
Okay,
other words,
cool.
I did take the equation and I put it into y equal mx plus b format.
Okay,
Okay. Now,
cool.
for question B. What is
Uh-huh.
x-intercept and what does it represent?
So the x-intercept would be negative 2 over 3.
No, what's true about y when you're on the x-intercept?
X has to be,
What's true about y?
y has to be on the y-intercept.
No, y has to be 0.
Oh, okay.
In other words, if I have a curve and I have a line like that, and I want to
Uh-huh.
know what that point is, well, what's the y-axis? The y measurement is 0, right?
Right.
And if I want to know the y-intercept, what's the x measurement?
Um, minus 2/3.
0.
Or 0. 0, yeah. Yeah.
Huge concept in algebra. Don't forget this. When you're solving for x-intercept, y is 0. When you're solving for y-intercept, x is 0.
Okay, that makes sense.
So if we go back to our equation
Uh-huh.
and I want to know the x-intercept, what's the next step?
Um,
What's y when I'm trying to solve for the x-intercept?
0.
That's what I do. Make y equals 0.
Okay, that makes sense.
And then solve it. Well,
Okay.
solve that. I get x equals minus 20. Let's see, that's minus 2/3 x. Now I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
multiply both sides by minus 3/2. That's what
Okay.
it takes to get rid of that minus 2/3 in front of the x.
Okay.
Always multiply by the reciprocal of the fraction. And now that leaves x all by itself on the right, and it gives me 30 on the left.
Okay, that makes
Now, what
sense.
does that mean? What's the x-intercept and what does it represent? So the
So,
x-intercept is 30. What does that mean?
it means that they sold 30 hats
And 0
and
t-shirts.
0 t-shirts, yeah.
Exactly. In other words, the x-intercept represents where they sold 0 t-shirts.
Okay.
And the y-intercept is where they sold 0 hats.
Okay.
Now, if I go back to my function
Mm-hmm.
and I try to calculate the y-intercept, what am I going to do as a first step?
You would just put x as 0 instead of y.
So y must be 20.
Yeah.
So if I'm only going to sell one or the other, I'm going to sell either 30 hats or 20 t-shirts.
Okay.
Oh, excuse me, 200, not 20,
Right.
200.
No. Yeah.
And the
Wait, wouldn't it be 20? Or,
let's see, 20 times 15 is only 300. 2 times 15 is 30. 20 times 15 is 300. 200 times 15 is 3,000.
oh, that's okay. Okay.
Okay. So,
Okay.
yeah, so actually my original equation, I made a math error at the very beginning, and it's y equals minus 2/3 x plus 200.
Plus 200. Okay.
Right. And then that will give you an x-intercept of, see, my x-intercept is where y is 0. So my x-intercept is at 300.
Mm-hmm.
I can sell 300 hats and get
Yeah.
$3,000 that way. Or I can
Mm-hmm.
sell 200 t-shirts and get the $3,000 that way. So
Okay.
each of those represents if you sell 0 of the other.
Okay.
Number D, what's the slope?
Minus 2/3.
I see a graph over here, so clearly they want you to graph that. How do I graph that function?
You'd start at 20 and then,
200.
or I mean 200, my bad. Yeah, I
Yeah,
even changed out my paper.
make sure you don't put 20 in there. I would feel terrible because I
No,
made
you're fine.
that mistake, not you.
No
And,
problem.
and what's the slope?
Minus 2/3, so you go down, uh, 20 over 30.
Or down 2 over 3.
Yeah.
Make sure when you're done you have a negative slope, which that is.
Mm-hmm.
And this x-intercept right there is going to be 300.
Okay.
Okay, so there's our curve and it's labeled properly. In other words, the x-intercept is 300, the y-intercept is 200, and that represents the equation that we're dealing with.
Okay.
So if they sold 150 hats, how many t-shirts would they have to sell?
Okay, so you just do y is equal to negative 2/3 times 150 plus 200.
So we got y equals negative 2/3 times 150 plus 200. Do that. How do you do that right there?
Um,
Best way to do it.
would you just multiply the denominator by 150 and divide by minus 2?
No, this 150 has a 1 as a denominator. Well,
Okay.
I have two choices. I can multiply numerators and multiply denominators, giving me this. But the better way to do it always is to reduce it, simplify it. In other words, divide top and bottom by 3. If I divide top and bottom by 3, then I have minus 2 times 50,
Okay.
which is 100.
Right.
Y would be 100. So
Cool.
if I only sold 150 hats, that would only bring in $1,500.
Right.
And then if I sold 100 t-shirts, that'd bring in another $1,500. And that
Okay.
would raise my required 3,000.
Okay.
Okay.
Cool. Cool.
If I sold 60 t-shirts, how many hats do I have to sell?
So would you just do 60 is equal to 2/3 x plus 200?
Minus 2/3 x?
Or minus, yeah, my bad.
Yeah, because the number of t-shirts you sell is y. And they're saying y is 60. So how many hats? So I merely solve that for hats. I get minus 140 equals minus 2/3 x. Multiply both sides by minus 3/2 to get rid of that coefficient.
Right.
I know that's going to cancel with that, so I'm going to be left with x alone over there. And again, over on the left side, I'm going to divide top and bottom by 2, turning that into a 70.
Okay.
So now I know that's 210.
Right.
So I would have to sell 210 hats if I only sold 60 t-shirts.
Okay, cool.
Find two other combinations of t-shirts and hats that satisfy the equation. Well, you can pretty much make up any numbers you want.
Okay.
Seriously.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
other words, there's no specific answer because there's an infinite number of combinations.
Mm-hmm.
So let's try 100 hats and figure out how many t-shirts we need. And then let's try 50 hats and see how many t-shirts we need.
Okay.
So that will answer G. But basically, it says find two other combinations indicating that there's all kinds of them. and which means you can pick any numbers you want for one of the variables.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
That
Now,
makes sense.
number J, what is the reasonable domain for this problem? Now, the domain, if we look back at our original function,
Or the
domain
X value.
always has to do with the X.
Yeah.
X is the number of hats we're going to sell. So what's the low end of the domain? Can we sell negative number of hats?
No, so just 0.
0, right there. And we can sell 0 hats.
Yeah.
What's the maximum number of hats we can sell? To just meet our goal.
300.
And we can sell that, so that needs a bracket also. So if I'm giving the domain an interval notation, it's 0, 300 surrounded by 2 brackets, because it's okay to sell 0 hats and it's okay to sell 300 hats.
Okay.
So it's not parentheses there, it's brackets.
Right.
What about the range? What are the feasible range values? What's the
300 hats or t-shirts and then no hats?
Well, if you sold
300
t-shirts, you'd get $4,500.
I mean, yeah, 300 hats. Wait.
0 hats.
Yeah, 0 hats and then
0 t-shirts. What's the upper end of the t-shirts?
hold on. 200.
There's your effective range.
Cool. That makes sense.
You can't sell a negative number of t-shirts. You really can't sell more than 200 t-shirts if you're only trying to raise $3,000.
For sure. Yeah.
So that's the range.
Okay.
In the margin, sketch the graph of the equation as it appears on your calculator. Well, we already sketched it.
Yeah, so we're good there.
Yeah, once you come up with the right equation, which is what I have a check mark by, well, now you can put that in your calculator if you want. I don't know why you'd want to. It's not that hard to graph. In other
No,
words,
it really isn't.
Linear equation in y equals mx plus b format, it doesn't get any easier than that. So,
right.
And they say limit your graph to the appropriate domain. Well, if I'm going to draw my graph, the y-intercept was 200, the x-intercept was 300. My graph's going to look exactly like that, not going to the left of the y-axis and not going below the y or the x-axis. That I'm limiting my graph to the appropriate domain and range. The range was 200, 0 to 200. The domain was 0 to 300. So in other words, I'm not going to draw this thing to the left like that, because that would represent a negative number of hats. That's really not part of my graph.
No.
And I'm not going to draw the line below the x-axis. That would represent a negative y. And you can't sell a negative number of t-shirts either.
No.
So it's just a line that starts there and stops there.
That makes sense. Okay.
All right.
Cool.
You got any more for tonight?
I don't. That's pretty much, yeah, that's the only one that I was having trouble on.
Yeah, I don't see anything above 3 here. You were good on every 1 and 2?
Yeah, those were good.
All right.
Cool.
Well, I kind of like this question because I like all of the A through K. It really makes you examine exactly what you're doing. just a note on number A where you've got independent and dependent.
Uh-huh.
Even if you use X and Y here, you never are going to want X to be a combination of things.
Okay.
In other words, you wouldn't want it to be the number of hats and t-shirts.
No.
If you're dealing with two variables, then make a variable for each one,
Okay.
not one variable for the combination. And the cost, never make a variable be something that they are giving you in the problem.
Mm-hmm.
They are giving you the cost. 10 bucks
Right.
for hats, 15 bucks for t-shirts. Therefore, that cannot be part of your variable defining.
No. You can't
Always,
do that, yeah.
always check that. So at
Okay.
no point would you want to put cost of anything.
No.
It's the number of hats for X, the number of t-shirts for Y.
Okay. Cool.
All right.
Awesome.
Well, Dylan, I will let you go then if you don't have anything else to cover.
Sure, I don't. Yeah,
All
so
right. You
all
know how
right.
to graph this? Are you using the Inspire now?
We are, yeah. I think it's pretty easy actually.
Really? Because
Um
it's what did you use before that? Did you use the
uh,
TI-84?
we actually never really used any graphing calculators until now.
Oh, okay. So that's why
Yeah,
it's
so it's
easy.
like a first time.
See,
Yeah.
if you'd have been using the TI-84, you wouldn't say that.
Right. I mean that'd be
It's so different.
yeah.
The
Is it really?
Inspire, yes, tremendously different than the
Okay.
TI-84. In fact, everybody that put in the effort to learn how to use the TI-84 is pissed
Mm-hmm.
off because they have to basically learn an entire new operating system to learn the Inspire.
Jeez.
So in a way, you're almost better off that you've never had a graphing calculator before now.
Right.
And that way your learning curve, it's still high. You still have to learn how to use it, but
Mm-hmm.
not different from what you know. So it's not that hard to learn.
Okay. Yeah.
But it's worth learning. It's a great calculator. The Inspire, I love it. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
it
I
does
do too.
one
It's actually
thing
really
that
good.
all others don't do, and it shows you the function that you put in.
I love that. Yeah.
Now, if
Which
you've
is
never dealt with a TI-84, it doesn't show you that. You have to make sure you get all your parentheses right. And, if you got
exactly
something divided by something else, it's hard to put it in there.
right.
The
Right.
Inspire takes away that problem because it gives you instant feedback as to what function you're putting in there to graph.
Sweet.
And
Yeah.
so it's a great calculator, yeah. And it'll
Awesome.
do everything. It'll factor for you. I mean, of course, so will the TI. No, the TI-84 I don't think will. But the Inspire
Yeah.
will. If you don't have that feature turned off or locked out, it'll
Mm-hmm.
factor any two numbers. It'll factor a quadratic for you.
Wow.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's
that's
powerful.
actually really cool.
It is cool. But
Yeah.
don't think that they will allow, I don't know how they handle that when they give you a test and they ask you to factor stuff. I don't know how they
Right.
keep you from using your calculator to do it. Um,
Uh-huh.
I know that there's a way to turn off some of the features in the calculator. And when those Inspires first came out, I actually had a student whose teacher turned off some of the features in everybody's calculator and then didn't know how to turn it back on,
Oh.
which is a
Oh,
bummer. But
that is a bummer.
yeah, and I don't even know how to turn it off because I never do it on mine. I have
Mm-hmm.
an Inspire, but
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
God, in fact, when you learn the Inspire, you wonder why you ever have to learn how to factor or do derivatives or integrals or any of that, because that
Right.
calculator will do all of it.
Just does it for you.
It will do
Exactly.
everything, pretty much. Not quite everything for you. In other words, it wouldn't answer these questions. You have to be able to
Right.
work through a question like this on your own and the logic,
Exactly.
but it'll do a lot. It's a super powerful calculator.
Cool. All right.
All right, Dylan.
Awesome.
I will
Yeah.
let you go. You have a good weekend, and I will talk to you next time.
That sounds good. Thank you, Mr. Cowan.
All right, bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.